The text message from my mother was crystal clear: family meeting, 7 p.m., non-negotiable. Elara stood at the front door of her parents' estate, her hand hovering over the brass knocker. She knew whatever waited inside wouldn't be good. The perfectly manicured lawn and gleaming carriages in the driveway screamed success, the kind her family worshipped, but one she had long since abandoned in favor of something far less conventional. Elara was the black sheep of the Calloway family. While her siblings collected accolades like trading cards, Wren as a cunning merchant, Lucian as a scholar, and Margot as a socialite, she chose a different path, one that involved creating things with her hands, blending alchemy and artistry to craft extraordinary works from discarded materials. To her family, however, this craft was nothing more than a frivolous hobby unworthy of their name. The door swung open before she could knock. "You're late," her mother said, lips pressed into a thin line. Elara glanced at her pocket watch. It read 6:58 p.m. In her family's eyes, anything less than 30 minutes early was considered tardy. "The others are waiting." Her mother gestured for her to enter. The living room fell silent as Elara stepped inside. Wren sat stiffly on the edge of an ornate chair, his ledger resting beside him. Margot lounged nearby, fanning herself lazily, while Lucian barely looked up from the book in his lap. Their father stood by the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back like a general preparing for battle. "Sit down, Elara," he commanded, gesturing to the lone armchair facing everyone else. The setup reminded her of those intervention shows she'd once seen in passing, the spectacle designed to intimidate. "What's this about?" Elara asked, remaining standing. Wren reached into his satchel and pulled out a document. "We've been discussing the family's future," he said in his practiced courtroom voice, "and we've come to a decision, a necessary one." Her mother added, perching beside Margot, "for the good of the family." The document made its way into Elara's hands. The legal jargon was dense, but certain phrases leapt off the page: formal dissolution of familial ties, relinquishment of inheritance rights, termination of family association. "You're disowning me," Elara whispered. "It's not personal," Wren replied coolly. Elara laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet room. "I'm your daughter, your sister. How is this not personal?" "Your choices reflect poorly on the family name," her father interjected. "My little craft hobby," Elara corrected sharply. "Making trinkets in your workshop isn't a business," Margot scoffed. "It's embarrassing. Do you know how it feels when people ask what my sister does?" "We gave you every opportunity," her mother continued, "connections, resources, and you've thrown it all away to play with scraps and dust." Elara looked down at the document again, her hands steady despite the storm raging within. Years of subtle jabs, disappointed sighs, and backhanded compliments had prepared her for this moment. They'd never understood her, never tried to. "Where do I sign?" Her mother blinked, clearly expecting tears or pleading. "Melanie, if you just reconsider your choices." "Where do I sign?" Elara repeated, cutting her off. Wren pointed to the bottom of the page. "Initial here and sign here. There's a notary waiting in the study." 10 minutes later, it was done. Elara was no longer officially part of the Calloway family. As she headed for the door, her father's voice followed her. "This is for the best." Elara turned back one last time, taking in their faces the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. "You know what's funny?" she said softly. "You're so worried about the family name, about success and reputation, but you have no idea what I've actually built. You never bothered to ask." Her mother started to speak, but Elara cut her off. "You've made your choice. Now you get to live with it." The door closed behind her with a soft click far too gentle for the magnitude of what had just happened. As Elara walked to her carriage, her mind buzzed with thoughts of the orders waiting to be filled, the upcoming collaborations, and the growing recognition her work was receiving. A notification chimed on her device, an inquiry from a prominent collector. She smiled faintly. Success, after all, was the sweetest revenge. But as she drove away from the house she'd grown up in, Elara didn't feel sadness or anger. Instead, she felt something else entirely: freedom. Freedom to be exactly who she was without apology or explanation. Family, she realized, isn't about sharing a name or DNA. It's about who believes in you when no one else will. And she had people in her life who did exactly that. They just weren't the ones she was leaving behind. Elara's workshop was a sanctuary tucked away in the shadow of the city's bustling market square. The space smelled of molten metal and charred wood, its walls lined with shelves cluttered with jars of powdered minerals, half finished sculptures, and sketches that seemed to breathe with life. It was here, amidst the organized chaos, that she found solace after the family meeting. The sting of their rejection still lingered, but it no longer felt like a wound, it had become fuel. Theo arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, his silhouette framed by the flickering glow of Elara's lanterns. He carried a bundle of gears and cogs under one arm, his usual offering when he visited. Theo was an inventor, his mind a labyrinth of ideas that often outpaced his ability to execute them. Like Elara, he had been cast aside by those who couldn't or wouldn't satisfy his passions. Their friendship had grown out of shared isolation, two misfits finding kinship in a world that prized conformity. "You look like someone who needs distraction," Theo said, setting his bundle on the workbench. His tone was light, but his sharp eyes missed nothing. "Is it that obvious?" Elara asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her hands were streaked with soot, and her apron bore the marks of a day spent pouring molten glass into molds. "Only if you count the fact that you've been staring at that same piece for 20 minutes without touching it." Elara glanced down at the sculpture in question, a delicate spiral of copper wires and shards of colored glass. It was meant to represent resilience, though she hadn't quite figured out how to finish it. "I'm stuck," she admitted. Theo grinned. "Good thing I brought reinforcements," he gestured to the bundle. "I salvaged these from a broken automaton. Thought they might inspire you." Inspiration came not just from the materials, but from Theo himself. As they worked side by side, their conversation meandered from technical details about Lois to more personal topics. Theo spoke of his latest invention, a clock designed to measure not time, but moments of joy, and Elara found herself opening up about the family meeting. "They think I'm wasting my life," she said, shaping a wire into a curve. "That what I do doesn't matter because it doesn't make money." Theo paused, his hands hovering over a gear. "And what do you think?" "I think," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, "I think they're wrong. What I create is not just art or science. It's both. It's proof that something broken can be beautiful again, that waste can have purpose." Theo nodded slowly. "Sounds like you're building more than sculptures then." Elara smiled faintly. "Maybe." Word of Elara's work began to spread, thanks in part to Mira, a street artist with a knack for storytelling. Mira had stumbled upon Elara's workshop months earlier, drawn by the shimmering glow of molten glass visible through the window. Since then, she'd become an unofficial ambassador for Elara's creations, sharing tales of the alchemist's daughter who turned trash into treasure. "She's got a way with words," Theo remarked one evening as they packed up pieces for an upcoming exhibition. "Makes your work sound like magic?" "It is magic," Elara replied, though she knew Mira's talent lay in making people see what they otherwise might overlook. The exhibition was held in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a space known for showcasing unconventional artists. Elara's corner featured a collection of her most ambitious works, a chandelier forged from melted coins, a mirror frame embedded with fragments of shattered porcelain, and a kinetic sculpture that mimicked the movement of waves. Each piece told a story not just of creation but of transformation. Mira stood nearby, chatting animatedly with visitors. When a noblewoman approached Elara, her expression skeptical yet curious, Mira smoothly interjected. "This one," she said, pointing to the chandelier, "is called Reclaimed Light. It's made entirely from currency coins melted down and reshaped. A reminder that value isn't fixed, it's what we choose to see." The noblewoman tilted her head, studying the piece. "It's unexpected," she murmured. Then, after a pause, "I'll take it." By the end of the night, nearly every piece had sold. Elara's name buzzed through the crowd, whispered alongside phrases like visionary and genius. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of pride, not because of the praise, but because her work was being seen for what it truly was. But success brought complications. A week later, a letter arrived bearing the Calloway family seal. Elara stared at it for a long moment before tossing it onto the workbench unopened. "What's that?" Theo asked, nodding toward the envelope. "Nothing important," Elara replied, though her voice betrayed a hint of unease. Theo raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Instead, he picked up a pair of pliers and began tinkering with a broken spring. "You know," he said casually, "sometimes the hardest part of moving forward is deciding what to leave behind." Elara watched him work, his words settling somewhere deep within her. Leaving behind her family's expectations had been painful but necessary. Yet now, as whispers of their struggles reached her ears, rumors of declining fortunes, and strained relationships, she wondered if cutting ties completely was as simple as it seemed. Still, she resolved not to dwell on it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them on her own terms. After all, she had built her life from scraps and shadows. Why should she fear the unknown when she had already mastered the art of reinvention? Elara's newfound success was intoxicating, a whirlwind of interviews, commissions, and accolades that left little room for reflection. Yet, as she stood in her workshop surrounded by glowing lanterns and half finished sculptures, the weight of her family's absence lingered like an unspoken shadow. She had built something extraordinary from nothing, something they hadn't believed in, let alone understood. But now cracks were beginning to form in their polished facade, and whispers of their struggles reached her ears. The first sign came through Mira, who casually mentioned overhearing gossip at the market. "Your family's dealership is struggling," she said one evening while helping Elara pack orders. "People are saying they're drowning in debt." Elara paused mid-motion, her hands resting on a delicate glass vase. And nothing," Mira replied quickly, sensing the tension. "Just thought you should know." But it wasn't just idle chatter. Days later, they arrived with more concrete news. "I ran into Ren at the guild hall," he said, setting down a box of gears. He didn't say much, but he looked different, stressed. Elara shrugged, feigning indifference. "Not my problem anymore." Yet the encounters kept coming. Margaret appeared at her workshop unannounced, clutching a designer handbag like a shield. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. "It's about Mother." Elara crossed her arms. "What about her?" "She's sick. Exhaustion, they think. Stress." Margaret hesitated, glancing around the cluttered space. "She won't stop asking for you." Elara felt a pang of guilt, but pushed it aside. "After everything they did, they threw me away like I was nothing." "I know," Margaret whispered, "but she's still our mother." That night, Elara lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Memories flooded back, her mother's sharp words, her father's dismissive tone, the cold finality of signing those papers. They had rejected her, yes, but now they were reaching out, not out of love or pride, but desperation. Was this what reconciliation looked like, or was it simply another transaction? The breaking point came when a letter arrived, handwritten in her father's shaky script. Elara stared at it for a long moment before unfolding the page. "Melanie, I've written this letter 100 times in my head, and nothing sounds right. Nothing can excuse what we did. You were always the strongest of us, the most genuine. We were too blind to see it. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for a chance to be the father I should have been, to be the family you deserved." Her hands trembled as she read on. "We're losing everything, but that's not why I'm writing. We lost what mattered most the day we signed those papers. We lost you. I'm proud of you, not because of your success, but because of who you are, who you've always been." The letter ended with two simple words: "Love, Dad." Elara sat in silence, the paper crumpled slightly in her grip. Part of her wanted to burn it, to erase any lingering connection to the people who had hurt her so deeply. But another part, a quieter, softer part, wondered if there was still a chance to heal the fractures between them. When the call came from Margot the next morning, Elara answered. "She's in the hospital," Margot said, her voice breaking. "Please, Mel, just come." Against her better judgment, Elara went. The hospital waiting room was eerily quiet, save for the hum of fluorescent lights. Her siblings looked up as she entered, their faces etched with exhaustion and guilt. For once, no one spoke. "Where is she?" Elara asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "Room 304, Margot replied. "Father's with her." Elara nodded and turned toward the elevator, leaving her siblings behind. As the doors closed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror, wall stronger, surer, yet still carrying the scars of their betrayal. When she stepped into the hospital room, her father stood by the window, his shoulders slumped. Her mother lay in the bed, pale and frail, her eyes fluttering open at the sound of footsteps. "Melanie," her mother whispered, tears welling in her eyes, "you came." Elara approached cautiously, her heart pounding. "Why shouldn't I have?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. "You only call when you need something." Her mother flinched but didn't argue. "I know we failed you," she said softly. "But please, can we try again?" Elara studied her mother's face, the lines etched by years of stress, the vulnerability in her gaze. It would be easy to walk away, to leave them with the consequences of their choices, but something held her back. "Trying isn't enough," Elara said finally. "If we do this, it has to be on my terms. No more hiding who I am. No more shame about being different." Her father nodded slowly. Whatever you want. Just don't give up on us. For the first time in months, Elara allowed herself to consider the possibility of forgiveness not because they deserved it, but because she deserved peace. Still, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding trust took more than apologies, it required action. As she left the hospital that night, Elara realized she wasn't just fighting for her family anymore. She was fighting for herself for the chance to prove that even broken relationships could be forged anew, stronger than before. The chandelier in her workshop caught the moonlight as she returned home, its shards of glass casting fractured patterns across the walls. Broken pieces, yes, but together they formed something unexpected, something beautiful, like her life, like her family, like the future she dared to imagine. The launch of Phoenix Electric marked more than just the reinvention of a family business, it was the beginning of a new chapter for the Gonzalez family. Elara stood at the entrance of the showroom on opening day, her heart pounding as she watched the crowd pour in. The space gleamed with polished surfaces, sleek electric vehicles, and her signature art installations crafted from recycled materials. It was a fusion of her vision and her family's legacy reimagined for a sustainable future. Her father's speech during the ribbon-cutting ceremony had been unexpected yet deeply moving. "My daughter didn't just save this company," he'd said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "She saved us by being exactly who she always was." Those words lingered in Alara's mind long after the applause faded. For years, she had craved their approval, their pride. Now that it was finally here, she realized how much work remained to rebuild what they had broken. Inside the showroom, reporters buzzed around her, firing questions about her journey, her art, and the innovative business model behind Phoenix Electric. But Elara's attention kept drifting to her family. Wendy was fielding inquiries from potential investors, her courtroom poised now serving a very different purpose. Louisa was guiding a group of medical professionals through the showroom, explaining how the company planned to partner with hospitals for eco-friendly transport solutions. Even Nathan seemed to have found his footing, enthusiastically discussing research initiatives aimed at advancing green technology. Watching them, Elara felt a flicker of hope, not because everything was perfect, but because they were trying. Still, old habits die hard. Later that evening, as the event wound down, tensions flared when Wendy suggested tweaking some of Elara's artistic designs to appeal to a broader audience. "It's not about compromising your vision," Wendy argued, her tone clipped. "It's about maximizing profits." Elara crossed her arms, irritation bubbling beneath the surface. "This isn't just decoration, Wendy. Every piece tells a story of transformation, of resilience. If we start diluting that message for profit, we lose what makes this place unique." Wendy opened her mouth to respond, but Louisa stepped in before things escalated. "Maybe there's a middle ground," she offered gently. "We can highlight the stories behind the pieces while still making them accessible to more people." Elara hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but only if we keep the integrity intact." Moments like these reminded Elara that reconciliation wasn't a straight line, it was messy, complicated, and often uncomfortable. Yet, each challenge brought them closer to understanding one another. They weren't just rebuilding a business, they were learning how to be a family again. That night, as the last guest departed, Elara gathered her family under the massive chandelier that dominated the showroom. Its shards of glass caught the fading light, casting fractured patterns across their faces. She held up an envelope containing the original disowned papers, which had somehow survived all these months. "We never did destroy these publicly," she said, her voice soft but firm, "but I think it's time we laid them to rest for good." Her father nodded solemnly. "Whatever you decide, Melanie will stand by it." Elara led them to the live demonstration area, a glass furnace designed for creating molten sculptures. One by one, they fed the papers into the flames, watching as decades of pain and misunderstanding turned to ash. When the fire down, Elara picked up her tools and began shaping the molten glass mixed with the ashes into something new. "This," she explained, her hands moving deftly, "is how you make beauty from pain." Hours later, a small sculpture sat cooling on the workbench, a delicate phoenix rising from its base, its core infused with the remnants of the burned papers. Her mother reached out to touch it, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's us," she whispered. "No," Elara corrected softly. "It's who we are now, not perfect, not unbroken, but stronger where we were broken." As the night drew to a close, Ezra and Mara joined them, grinning at the sight of the family huddled together around the sculpture. "Ready to call it a night, boss?" Ezra asked. Elara glanced around at her siblings, her parents. and her chosen family, the people who had believed in her when no one else would. She smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. Actually, she said, meeting their gangs as one by one, I think we're just getting started. Above them, the chandelier caught the last rays of daylight, scattering rainbows across the showroom floor. Like family, like art, like life itself, sometimes the most beautiful things come from knowing exactly which pieces to keep, which to transform, and which to let go. Come on, Elara said, turning toward the door. Let's go home. And this time she knew exactly what that meant. The launch of Phoenix Electric wasn't just a business milestone, it was a testament to resilience, reinvention, and the power of second chances. Yet, as Elara stood in the showroom on opening night, surrounded by reporters, investors, and admirers, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long, filled with challenges both expected and unforeseen. But for the first time, she felt equipped to face them not alone, but alongside people who truly understood her. Her family had changed too. Wendy's sharp courtroom precision now served the company's legal needs, ensuring every contract was airtight. Louisa had found purpose heading the medical transport division, using her experience as a nurse to create solutions tailored to healthcare professionals. Even Nathan, once hesitant to take a stand, had embraced his role leading research partnerships with universities. They weren't perfect, they still argued, still stumbled, but they were learning how to support one another without judgment or expectation. Elara's father remained an enigma, his pride softened but not entirely erased. He spent hours in the workshop with her, watching silently as she worked. One evening, as she shaped molten glass into a delicate sculpture, he finally spoke. You've always been stronger than me, he admitted, his voice gruff. I don't mean the business or the art, I mean here. He tapped his chest. You had the courage to walk away when it mattered most. Elara paused, setting down her tools. It wasn't about walking away, Dad. It was about finding my own path and maybe helping you find yours. He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. We're lucky you came back. Not luck, Elara corrected gently. Choice. We all chose to try again. The next morning, Ezra burst into the workshop waving his tablet. Mel, you need to see this. What is it? She asked, wiping soup from her hands.
The Sustainable Arts Foundation just announced their annual gala, and guess who's keynote speaker? Elara groaned, half laughing. Tell them I'm booked.
Nope, Mara chimed in, appearing behind Ezra. Already confirmed, plus they want you to showcase a new installation. Elara sighed, glancing at the half-finished piece on her workbench. Can't I just send the chandelier? Nope, Ezra repeated, grinning. But hey, think of the exposure. As much as she teased, Elara knew they were right. Her work wasn't just about creating beauty, it was about sparking conversations, challenging perceptions, and inspiring others to see potential where none seemed to exist. Still, the constant spotlight wore on her. Some days she longed for the quiet solitude of her early days in the garage before fame and fortune complicated everything. That afternoon, she retreated to the rooftop garden above the showroom, a sanctuary she designed herself. The space was alive with greenery, recycled materials repurposed into planters and benches. She sat among the plants, sketching ideas for her next project when her mother joined her. Mind if I sit? Her mother asked softly. Elara patted the bench beside her. Always room. Her mother settled down, holding a cup of tea. Your father told me what you said yesterday. About choices? Elara nodded, continuing to sketch. Yeah, choices matter more than luck. Always have. Her mother sipped her tea, hesitating before speaking. Do you think we'll ever really move past all of this? Or are we just pretending everything's okay because it has to be? Elara set her pencil down, turning to face her mother. It's not pretending, Mom. Not anymore. We're trying. All of us. That's what matters. But the scars. Scars aren't bad, Elara interrupted. They remind us where we've been, what we've overcome. Without them, we wouldn't know how far we've come. Her mother smiled faintly, reaching out to touch Elara's hand. You've grown so much, Melanie. Sometimes I wonder if I even deserve to call myself your mother anymore. You earned it, Elara replied firmly. Not because of what happened before, but because of what you're doing now. Because you're trying. The moment stretched between them, unspoken forgiveness hanging in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. When her mother finally stood to leave, Elara returned to her sketch, adding details to the design of Phoenix rising from shattered glass, its wings ablaze with color.
Weeks later, at the Sustainable Arts Gala, Elara took the stage to thunderous applause. The audience included industry leaders, environmental activists, and even a few familiar faces from her past. As she began her speech, she held up the small glass phoenix she'd created for the occasion.
This piece, she said, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest, represents transformation. It's made from fragments of broken mirrors, melted coins, and shards of discarded glass, things most people would throw away. But when you look closely, you can see the beauty hidden within the damage. She paused, scanning the crowd. My family taught me something important, not just about breaking, but about rebuilding. About choosing to see value where others see waste, about believing in the possibility of change, even when it feels impossible. The room was silent, every eye fixed on her. Sustainability isn't just about materials or methods, it's about relationships, about communities, about understanding that sometimes the things we discard hold the greatest potential for renewal. As she stepped off the stage, Ezra and Mara greeted her with wide grins. Nailed it, Ezra said, giving her a high five. Told you they'd love it, Mara added, hugging her tightly. Later that evening, as the gala wound down, Elara wandered through the exhibition hall, admiring the other installations. Each piece told a story, much like her own, a narrative of struggle, growth, and hope. Near the exit, she found her family gathered around a display featuring her work. Her father stood closest, his expression unreadable. What do you think? She asked, joining them. He hesitated, searching for words. It's extraordinary, like you. Elara laughed softly, looping her arm through his. Thanks, Dad.
Outside, the city skyline glittered against the night sky. Elara lingered on the steps, taking it all in, the lights, the sounds, the endless possibilities stretching before her. Her phone buzzed with a notification, another order, another opportunity. She silenced it, tucking the device into her pocket. Ready to go home? Mara asked, appearing beside her.
Elara nodded, glancing back at the glowing building one last time. Yeah, let's go. As they walked toward the car, the wind carried fragments of music from a nearby street performer. Broken notes rearranged into something unexpectedly beautiful, just like her life, like her family, like the future she dared to imagine. And for the first time, Elara realized she wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. Whatever came next, she would face it not as the black sheep, not as the prodigal daughter, but as exactly who she was. Stronger where she'd been broken, braver because of the risks she'd taken, and ready to keep building something extraordinary from the pieces others had left behind.